This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome once again from Johannesburg here in South Africa. I'm Evan Jansen. This show is always live and it's broadcast from our studios here in Auckland Park. We're also live on YouTube right now, where the whole show is always available on demand on our YouTube channel. Now today, well, we're set to look at visa changes that will start today, the 1st of June, with the tourism industry nervous ahead of implementation. We also talk about what constitutes a bribe in world football. This after what happened over the weekend. We also get an update on the latest Ebola figures. Have we won the war? What's the latest? Also, there's a segment on Youth Month here in South Africa. We'll look at that. And then Southern Africa faces a drought crisis that could see widespread food shortages in countries like Zimbabwe. But all of that a little bit later. But first, let's get today's news from Anindo Mal.
Good morning, I'm Anindo Mal. Let's just take a look at the stories making headlines today. From today, Deputy Director of Public Prosecutions Mahau Ramaite will act in the position of NPA boss. This as the National Director of Public Prosecutions Mxolisi Hassana steps down. President Jacob Zuma has thanked the outgoing Hassana for his contribution to the National Prosecution Authority. Last year, the president introduced an inquiry to determine Hassana's fitness to continue to hold such office. Hassana subsequently challenged the president's power to suspend him in the North Gauteng High Court. The president then reached a settlement with him, in terms of which he agreed to vacate his position as NPA director from today. Lawyers of the arrested and injured Marikana miners are expected to push for the release of the Marikana report again today. The lawyers representing the mine workers of the 2012 Marikana shooting say their clients have no option but to approach the North Gauteng High Court. Meanwhile, the presidency says the president had already committed himself to releasing the report and would do so in due course. Police Minister Nkosi Nhleko Nkandla report looks set to be challenged in court. This as the economic freedom fighters will be taking legal steps against him and his cabinet. The party is accusing Zuma and his cabinet of conspiring to review, contradict and reverse the public protector's findings. The SACP meanwhile wants state officials and contractors linked to the Nkandla to be investigated. The minister said last week that President Zuma did not have to pay back any portion of the more than 200 million rand spent on his private home. Meanwhile, the DA has also repeated its statement that it's looking to the courts for a solution.
Here we need accountability. We need accountability as we saw in the Nkandla matter. We need accountability here in the Marikana matter, and we cannot have a repeat of the same saga. So my challenge here is that I've challenged the president to table the report with immediacy. He came to Parliament to mock us. Minister
Fikile Mbalula has reiterated that the $10 million paid to CAF was not taxpayers' money nor a bribe for the 2010 World Cup. This after SAFA President Danny Jordan said South Africa did pay the amount to the Confederation of North Central American and Caribbean Association Football. Jordan has also denied that it was a bribe. Jordan said the payment to the development fund was made through FIFA in 2008, 4 years after South Africa won the rights to host the 2010 FIFA World Cup. And President Jacob Zuma has joined East African leaders in calling for next month's elections in Burundi to be postponed for at least 6 weeks. The President and AU Commission Chair Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma attended a second regional summit on the crisis in Burundi in the Tanzanian city of Dar es Salaam. Burundian President Pierre Nkurunziza's decision to stand for a third term has caused weeks of violent protest. Nkurunziza did not attend yesterday's meeting. Well, remember, you can find all of those stories on our Newsroom Facebook page. Just search for Newsroom. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Evan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Annie. Now, the Ebola epidemic emerged in southern Guinea in December of 2013, spreading rapidly to Liberia and Sierra Leone. It has killed more than 11,000 people to date, although there are no longer cases of the deadly tropical disease in Liberia, and a steady decline has been seen in Sierra Leone. New cases are still emerging in Guinea. Joining us in studio today is the World Health Organization representative, Dr. Sarah Louise Barber, who will give us a later on the matter that seems to have almost disappeared from the public eye. Very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Is that accurate to say that this matter has somewhat disappeared from public consciousness and the media in a way?
Well, the media has paid much less attention to the Ebola outbreak. However, it's still very much foremost in the minds of public health professionals and the World Health Organization.
Now, only days after declaring the lowest number of Ebola cases in Guinea and Sierra Leone this year, officials reported 35 new cases. Just tell us, what is the current situation? Where are we in this fight? And then also, what are the challenges that aid agencies are facing in affected areas right now?
There was a spike in Guinea in the middle of May. And basically, the situation now is that many of the cases continue to come from Guinea, the majority of cases, where we're facing still community resistance, widespread distribution of the cases across 5 districts in Guinea. And this particular spike could be attributed to an unsafe burial. Essentially, the community members followed traditional practices rather than allowing the public health community to be involved in the burial, thus exposing about a dozen people to Ebola.
Now, the root cause of the virus has been a point of discussion. Are we any closer to establishing the root cause? There have been a number of reports of different causes.
Mm-hmm. Most of the scientific studies now conclude that essentially there was one jump. It's a disease that is carried through animals, essentially wildlife, and we think there was essentially one contact, a single contact between a boy, an 18-month-old boy, and possibly a fruit bat. And this essentially led to the beginning of extended human-to-human transmission throughout the region. So from what we know, there was a single jump from animals to humans.
Now, in the beginning of this year, the first shipment of about 300 vials of GlaxoSmithKline's experimental Ebola vaccine had been shipped to Liberia. These were given to healthcare workers in the first large-scale vaccine trial. What was the outcome of this trial?
Well, as you mentioned in your overview, the outbreak in Liberia was declared over in, I think it was May 9th. And essentially, when we do the vaccine trials, you actually do need cases to evaluate whether or not the vaccine is efficacious. So the Liberia trial was indeed stopped, and they're discussing moving that trial to Sierra Leone or Guinea, where cases are still occurring. However, there are 2 other large-scale phase 3 clinical trials ongoing in Guinea and Liberia. Guinea aims to enroll about 10,000 people, and Liberia aims to enroll about 6,000 people. And these trials are ongoing based on essentially a slightly different modified design in light of the reduced number of cases in Guinea and Sierra Leone.
Are we heading into a future where these kinds of vaccines will become a compulsory part of people's lives in the affected areas?
Well, that's really the question. Who's going to access those vaccines? And I think that first and foremost, the health workers were given these vaccines in Guinea, in Sierra Leone, in Liberia, because health workers are risking their lives caring for patients. And so health workers obviously get top priority. However, the questions about access are very complex, and there is, in fact, an expert working group led by Professor Helen Rees of Woods University, who's looking very much at what we do with the current information, the safety and the efficacy of the vaccines, when they could be administered, who gets priority, and essentially, particularly in light of the potential, the supply, how many vaccines we have.
How do we, and you as the World Health Organization, how do we prevent a future epidemic like this one?
Well, this is the big discussion. We just had the World Health Assembly, which is a grouping of all the ministers of the world, including the Minister of Health in South Africa, and their delegation attended to discuss this. We never want this to happen again. We had 11,000 people die in this outbreak, and all organizations involved are looking very seriously about how we can ensure that this doesn't happen again. So the World Health Organization essentially has tried to put forward a contingency fund. They've asked countries of the world to donate $100 million to be able to set aside an amount of money to be able to respond quickly to these outbreaks in the future. There's a proposal also that there's a global health emergency workforce, so a roster of people who could be on call at any minute to drop everything and attend to an emergencies, and those people would have the right skills to be able to respond quickly to this type of an outbreak in the future so it never happens again.
Could we and should we and are we going to do things a little bit differently on the ground going forward?
Yes, I think so. I think the biggest lesson is that we have to act quickly. The outbreak in Guinea took too long for the public health community to respond. It was many months before we really put a lot of resources into this outbreak. So I think the first lesson and the most important lesson is that we have to act quickly, and we have to resource the health ministries throughout the world to be able to act quickly so that they have the labs, they have access to labs, they have access to isolation facilities, and that patients can be cared for quickly and safely.
Well, I thank you for joining us today. That's Dr. Sarah Louise Barber, who's from the World Health Organization. We're talking about the response to Ebola. The latest is the War One. What are your views? At SABC Newsroom, of course, is where you can send us your contribution. Thank you once again for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's just take a quick look at our pick of the day. Now, South African tourism with the caption, "Congrats at Comrades Race on a truly great 90th Comrades Marathon. You did South Africa proud." Yes, it was a fantastic event that took place. And really good news for South Africa. Dominated for once. Now, let's go around the world quickly and see what's happening elsewhere. We start in New York. The Wall Street Journal reports that the number of drugs in short supply in the U.S. has risen to 74% over the past 5 years and includes cancer treatments and antibiotics. Wow. Said it's only in South Africa. We move to Europe. The Times. Former Prime Minister of Qatar has denied claims that his country paid large bribes to win the right to host the 2022 World Cup and accused the West of racism, Islamophobia and bias against Arabs. Then in Florida, also in the U.S., the Miami Herald says the Senate voted 77-17 last night to move forward on a House-passed bill, the USA Freedom Act, that would create an amended phone records program in a bid to stop the National Security Agency's spying powers, which expired last night. Now, FIFA President Sepp Blatter came out fighting this weekend as he began his 5th term in charge of soccer's governing body, implying that the United States timed the announcement of a major corruption probe to try and scupper his re-election bid. The 79-year-old Swiss comfortably won Friday's vote at a FIFA Congress in Zurich, having secured the support of blocks of votes from Asia and Africa, which outweighed dissenters, including Europe's powerful soccer body, UEFA. He now faces the daunting task of restoring public faith in an organization tainted by allegations of rampant graft and deeply divided over his leadership. Now, to give us his views, we're joined by soccer analyst Christophe Bongo, who's with us this morning. Good morning, Christophe.
Good morning.
Christophe, interesting week in world football. I know that you followed it very closely.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced that this wasn't a bit of a witch hunt against Sepp Blatter in particular,
Yeah.
and then let's call it an alliance of nations that includes South Africa, countries like Russia, who won the bids fair and square.
Yes, I mean, you started very well to say that he won it with ease. I mean, the election was not even competition. There are many European television, American television saying you can see FIFA is divided. Well, it's not divided because it is 290 member association, and out of that, they showed who they support. And the other point that you made, which is a very good, I'll say a story that will come closer to home. Namibia won the COSAFA Cup last weekend. And the people don't understand the correlationship between Namibia winning the COSAFA Cup and the FIFA election. Well, this is the correlationship. Sepp Blatter, who came in FIFA, realized that smaller nations needed to be helped. Myself, personally, I've been in Namibia 4 times under FIFA mission to make sure that Namibian football is being fixed. Yes. There's some new stadium, there's some goal positions, there are a lot of training going for their coaching, the technical director paid by FIFA, and to help Namibian football. Madagascar, the same story. So I've been to over 11 countries in Africa doing the work that nobody in Europe, America have been doing since 100 years of FIFA existence.
So what are you saying? What is the motivation behind this probe into FIFA suddenly? And they blame South Africa for paying bribes, $10 million US. What about the likes of Germany 2006, Korea 2002, France 1998, the USA themselves in 1994, when they weren't even playing football at that level? Surely they have a lot to answer for.
Well, talking of South Africa, our Minister of Sports said it categorically that we should not even talk about it because it does not even grant of talking about it because it does not make sense. South Africa sent the money to a confederation of football, which is a football FA. They did not send money to an individual.
Yes.
So whatever happened with that money in that federation has nothing to do with South Africa. That is number one.
But that was 4 years after we won the bid, the money changed hands.
So secondly, we have to go back very quickly to find out when did FIFA become corrupt. FIFA became corrupt when the center realigned itself, where the World Cup, our FIFA became a world company than being a European company or an American company. The Pope from the United States, it is an allegation. How come that allegation is not direct to Sepp Blatter? I'll tell you why. You elect a member from your own country to be the president of the federation.
Yeah.
That president of federation then becomes a FIFA member. So FIFA does not appoint people. You, in your individual country, you appoint people, assuming that person is corrupt. He's not corrupt because it's FIFA. He is corrupt because you, in your own country, voted that individual. Yeah. So when you talk about FIFA corruption, are you talking about individual countries being corrupt? France came out very clearly to say they voted for Sepp Blatter. Spain came very clearly to say they voted for Sepp Blatter. Russia said that. So all those reports you are reading, I'm telling you now, they've got one thing in common. It comes from the UK. All the reports you will read in the media today, it comes from the UK.
I followed this very closely more than 18 months ago when they missed out on 2018 and 2022. Yes. The British media went on a campaign at FIFA where they tried to get rid of FIFA through media channels and by amping up the pressure, and that hasn't worked. And this now is the next, coincidentally, it all coincided with the FIFA Congress.
Finished.
It looked like a bit of a witch hunt, didn't it?
It finished now. Of course it is. Let's look at the FIFA record. I'm not talking because I am a pro-Blatter. I am pro-African. FIFA at the moment sitting in almost $1.8 billion in reserve, not profit, in reserve, which means they are making money. Yeah. For the very first time, when you want to buy any product from FIFA, you are not getting it from any other television except FIFA TV. So FIFA became a big brand with big money. Unfortunately, it is not controlled by the mainstream Europe. That is the problem.
Europe needs somebody that's going to affect the decision-making in their favor a little bit. What does it say about Sepp Blatter, where he's now, and what does he need to do in the next year and then longer term to end his term in order to rid the world of this sort of tainted image?
Well, what Sepp Blatter needs to do, or what FIFA needs to continue doing, is to be a world body, which means keep looking after the smaller country. It won't be easy. That is the problem. When you go against the force, it won't be easy for you to just sleep and be calm. They'll keep fighting him. So now he has the mandate, and he become even much more powerful than before. Because now, this is his last mandate. It won't continue anymore. He has to keep continuing to make the good of football for the world, not for individuals. So for me, Sepp Blatter must continue his run of making football for small people.
Talking about that, under Sepp Blatter's tutelage at FIFA, the soccer or football has truly become a global game. There's a voice for Asia, there's a voice for Africa. Yes? And that should continue.
No, it should continue. Number one, the first thing that Sepp Blatter did with FIFA, people don't understand. He changed the logo of FIFA and he changed the slogan of FIFA. FIFA became for the world, the game for the world. And it's not the two balls anymore because he believes football is a product of the big organization. So for me, I believe Sepp Blatter is in the right course and he should keep it going.
Christoph, in some quarters that will be a controversial statement, but I agree with you. I think that without Sepp Blatter's leadership, African football would never have hosted a World Cup, and more importantly, the smaller countries would not have the power that they have.
People are talking about 2010. It's not only 2010. Africa has hosted under 20, under 17. Now we're looking at the women's football, and Africa got 5 posts in the World Cup. Asia got 5, whereby before, people are having a high moral ground. They did not even look at Africa. We had only 3 posts in the World Cup, whereby Europe had more.
Well, Chris, thanks for joining us today. We've run out of time. It's a discussion that people are continuing to have around the country today about the perceived corruption. I thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
Well, let's take a look now at what's happening around the country here in South Africa. We start in the capital, Pretoria, with a trial of 5 men accused of murdering Gauteng's top cop, Major General Tirani Maswanganyi, in 2013. Well, that's set to resume in the High Court. The men allegedly shot and killed Maswanganyi and dumped his body in a veld. Then, in Johannesburg, the mine workers who were injured and arrested during the 2012 Marikana shooting feel that they have no option but to approach the North Gauteng High Court today. This is to request that President Jacob Zuma release the Marikana report. You're watching Newsroom. We will be back with you after a short little break.
Welcome to Network, a technology news program that also discusses what's trending in social media in and around Africa. MTN has launched its new movie and television streaming service, Front Row. If it's trending, we will find it. That's Network with me, Spumelele Zondi, every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. only on the SABC News Channel.
Welcome back. You're still with Newsroom. Now, South Africa's travel and tourism industry has warned that it is expecting chaos to erupt today. This is new requirements for travelling to or from the country with minors comes into effect. From today, parents or guardians travelling with children will now be required to produce an unabridged birth certificate of a minor. Airlines have complained that they will have to carry the cost when turning away passengers due to the new regulations, and the local tourism industry says that the move could have dire implications and ramifications on the economy. Now, from Pretoria, we are joined by the CEO of the Tourism Business Council of South Africa, Matsatsi Remawela. We did extend an invite to the Department of Home Affairs, and they confirmed to be with us this morning, but the department spokesperson, Maihlome Chwete, cancelled about 10 minutes ago. But we will continue with our work here. Very good morning to you. Matsatsi.
Good morning.
The department says these restrictions will stop human trafficking and make South Africa safer for all. How do you view that statement? And then tell us, what will the cost of it be to the tourism industry?
Well, good morning, Eben, and thank you for the opportunity to present our side of the story as the travel and tourism industry. You know, we have never, from day one, we have never differed or contradicted what the department and government have been saying, you know, in terms of putting the new regulations of requiring people to have biometric data and the requirement for an unabridged birth certificate for minors under the age of 18 to have if they want to travel to South Africa. For us, even it has always been the consultation process. Consultation process that would have been able to take into consideration some of the unintended negative consequences that could result from this new regulation coming into play. We believe, as a travel and tourism industry, that there are other countries that have similar challenges. We believe that South Africa should have taken time to study what are those countries doing that it is not having those negative consequences to their own tourism industry. Even that our industry here in South Africa and Africa is struggling due to the lingering effect of Ebola and, of course, the recent xenophobic attacks. And we cannot afford to take any more strain, and that's always been our issue as an industry.
But human trafficking is a problem, not just in South Africa, it's a problem around the world. South Africa is taking a leap of faith in trying to deal with this issue. How do we balance the two, the commercial concerns against the human cost?
But even that's exactly the issue. If we believe that if we had, there's been effective consultation, and there were also issues around communication. Maybe let me do this even and just state upfront what is the major concern from our industry, so that people don't misunderstand that we are anti, controlling South Africa's borders and also assisting government dealing with the issues of child trafficking and human trafficking. Our concern even has been threefold. One, it has been around the issue of consultation, which we still stand up that we are not consulted as a major stakeholder, as a sector that stand to lose the most out of this regulation. Secondly, even it was the issue around communication. Last year when this regulation we put in the biometric visa requirement, we spoke to a lot of our colleagues out in the market, in some major key source markets of China and India, to find out if even ambassadors there were they ready for this new regulation. They were not ready. They didn't even know anything about it. And then, of course, the last other concern even is around the issue of implementation. When we looked on the ground, especially when you look at those key countries that are going to be affected, China and India, we don't have enough visa facilitation offices there. So that's been the major concern. So coming back to the unabridged birth certificate and to your question as well, we believe that we should have been able, as an industry with government, be able to say if this is what the government is facing. And by the way, even if you check, there's an organization called Africa Check. We have been presented as if South Africa is a major transit port, a major offender in terms of child trafficking. As I said, there are other countries in the world, Thailand, Mexico, that are facing this kind of challenge. What are those countries doing that South Africa should be learning instead of, doing what, people are going left and then South Africa is going right? That's been our major concern. And we still believe that's exactly the case. It's going to harm us, what we're doing right now.
You mentioned communication a little bit earlier as one of the problem areas. As the TBCSA, have you been able to engage with the department properly on this process?
We haven't. We have not been. We as an organization, neither us as the TBCSA, being the voice of the private sector in tourism here in South Africa, or any of our plus 15 sectoral associations were engaged directly. The only time we had an opportunity to sit in front of the Minister of Home Affairs was through Business Unity South Africa, because we're a member of that organization where we made representation, and also through IATA in that regard. And in those both occasions even, we spent almost R1 million as a TBCSA to produce 2 reports. In the first report that we produced last year in July was to be able to say to our minister, we are going to get you information in the ground. We don't want to come to you with anecdotal information that says A says this about the damage. And when that report came up, we didn't make it public. We directed the first recipient of that report was the Minister of Home Affairs, because we wanted him to see that the facts and figures as to what our concerns are. And recently, we've just released our second report, which went into the field. We consulted, a lot of our members on the ground, and we asked them the question, what has been the effect of this new regulation since it came into effect? And again, we gave that report to the minister. Again, to say, Minister, we are not putting anecdotal information. These are the facts that comes from the ground. This thing is harming our industry. We're talking between 50 to 70% of loss of tourists coming out of our major source market, where we're growing, China and India, and then, of course, Nigeria and other countries that require visas to come to South Africa. Now, the big worry, even with this unabridged birth certificate, is that it's affecting everybody. Whereas the biometric visas affects countries whose citizens requires visas to come to South Africa. This one affects anybody, anybody who wants to come to South Africa. You want to bring children with you, they're under 18, you've got to have this documentation. And we believe these regulations are so onerous that people are going to say, South Africa, other places in the world, well, is it easier here? And that's where people are going to go, where travelers will be made easier for them to go. And that's going to be our loss.
Thank you for joining us today. That's Matsatsi Ramawela from the Tourism Business Council of South Africa. Of course, today, new visa or new travel regulations go into effect here in South Africa, causing some consternation. Let's have a look at what your views are on this issue, of course, at SABC Newsroom. Now, Africa Check says, the week that was, will South African Home Affairs birth certificate requirement hurt tourism but curb child trafficking? That is the key question that is on the table. Nick Cook says, Home Affairs SA need urgent assistance with my unabridged birth certificate application. Been waiting more than 8 weeks now. Thanks, says Nick. Gil Herm says, why is my unabridged birth certificate taking 5 years? Help needed, don't know what to do. Can someone help? Case number put up there from Gil Herm. Yes, there are lots of concerns around this. Main question is, will it cause a decrease in human and child trafficking here in South Africa and the wider Southern Africa? How do you balance the books with the two? Let's have a look now at the tweet of the day. This one comes from our very own reporter, Mangoba Nkunu. As a matter of fact, he says, I'm happy for a tourist to stay away if they do not want to tell me whose child they are bringing or taking. Hashtag visa rules. That is a very sober reminder from our very own Mangoba. They're telling us about this contentious issue. Now, let's take a look at what's on our Facebook page. There you see today the South African Communist Party expressed concern at the ongoing instability within crime-fighting organs of the state. This comes in the wake of a settlement agreement reached by President Jacob Zuma and the National Prosecuting Authority boss Mxolisi Nxasana. Then the Nigerian economy grew at an average of 6.8% a year over the past decade, placing it among the fastest growing countries globally. But only about 25% of Nigerians have benefited from this growth. And a worker at Japan's Tokyo station received an unpleasant shock after opening an abandoned suitcase that no one had claimed for a month with the decomposing body of a woman inside. Now, for more news updates, you can follow our Facebook page. Just search SABC Newsroom. It'll pop up and you'll be able to interact with us live even there. Time for us to take another break. This is Newsroom here on SABC News.
Technology is all around us and is improving lives across Africa, like how young Nigerians are connecting to the internet. There are doctors finding new ways to save lives in Cameroon, and the South African public transport system that is now getting Wi-Fi. We have gadgets, apps and loads more, some of which play a big role in Africa's growth. A huge part of this African growth is technological innovation. To find out a bit more about social media and technology news from here in Africa and abroad, join me, Siphumelele Zondi, every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. on SABC News.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News. Let's take a look at the stories making headlines today. From today, Deputy Director of Public Prosecutions Mahao Ramayite will act in the position of NPA boss. This as the National Director of Public Prosecutions Mxolisi Nxasana steps down. President Jacob Zuma has thanked the outgoing Nxasana for his contribution to the National Prosecution Authority. Lawyers of the arrested and injured Marikana miners are expected to push for the release of the Marikana report again today. The lawyers representing mine workers of the 2012 Marikana shooting say their clients have no option but to approach the North Gauteng High Court. Meanwhile, the presidency says the president had already committed himself to releasing the report and would do so in due course. And Minister Fikile Mbalula has reiterated that the $10 million paid to the CONCACAF was not taxpayers' money nor bribe from the 2010 World Cup. This after SAFA President Danny Jordan said South Africa did pay the amount to the Confederation of North, Central American and Caribbean Association Football. Well, remember, you can find all of those stories on our Newsroom Facebook page. Just search for Newsroom. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Evan, back to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Janine. Now, today marks the beginning of Youth Month. Latest statistics by Statistics South Africa shows that the unemployment rate in South Africa increased to 26.4% in the first quarter of 2015 from 24.3% in the fourth quarter of last year. The country currently has less than 20 black women qualified as professional archaeologists. Now, for over the years, the heritage sector has been the least explored and the least interesting sector when it comes to youth career choices, something with the South African Heritage Resource Agency hopes to change here. SARA has launched an awareness campaign to promote and raise public awareness on careers in the heritage sector. Careers such as heritage management studies, archaeology, anthropology, amongst others. Now, from the South African Heritage Resource Agency, we're joined live in Cape Town by Katie Smuts, who is the Manager of Inventory. Very good morning to you, Katie. Thanks for joining us.
Morning, Evan. Thank you.
How important is it for young South Africans to know and preserve their and our heritage?
Evan, I think in South Africa we cannot overestimate how important it is that the youth understand, appreciate and practice heritage in South Africa. We have a phenomenally complex past, as we all know, and not only the recent and more distant historical past, but going back right to ancient times. From recent archaeological excavations, it seems apparent that humanity as we understand it, as the practice of modern behavior, originated in Southern Africa. So I think we have a phenomenal heritage to celebrate, and that for our youth to be mindful of where we come from and how we've got to the incredibly complex present that we live in this country. It's an exceptionally exciting career path and practice.
Now, what are some of the most exciting careers that young people can get into that we don't know about? And tell us then about the campaign drive that you guys are on.
Well, my personal background is as an archaeologist, and I, when dinner conversation falls flat, all I have to ever say is, I'm an archaeologist, and an excited ripple moves through the room. So personally, I think obviously that archaeology is phenomenally exciting, as is paleontology in this country. We've got some of the most extraordinary fossil remains from around the world. But any of the heritage studies, I really think that this country is an exceptional place to be engaged in study of the past. The anthropology of our first inhabitants, the Khoisan, is extraordinary in terms of world studies. So it would be hard put for me to pick the most exciting. And our Heritage Act, the National Heritage Resources Act, is one of the most progressive pieces of heritage legislation in the world. So even from a management point of view, a regulatory point of view, it's a very interesting field to be in. The drive, as you've said, centers around the fact that it's a very underexplored career option, particularly for people from disadvantaged backgrounds. It's tough to pick a career where you aren't necessarily walking into high-paying and freely available jobs. But I think that the reward that you get from the work and the capacity to grow yourself as a human being and really understand your place in the country and the country's place in the world is infinitely rewarding.
Now, you're an archaeologist, and we have less than 20 black female archaeologists in South Africa. That says a lot. How do we overcome this?
It's a tough one, and I know that the professional association, ASAPA, the Association of Southern African Professional Archaeologists, has been working very hard lately to redress the problems with transformation. As I've said, certainly when I was studying archaeology at university, it's never been a surefire career option. You don't know that you're going to walk out of university with a degree. But I think the diversification of the heritage industry has meant that anyone with a bit of imagination and some passion for their career can find ways of creating a niche for themselves. For instance, archaeotourism. We have the West Coast Fossil Park. We've got the phenomenal rock art of the Cederberg Mountains. There are extraordinary careers to be made in archaeotourism, for instance. And particularly where you're taking the knowledge of your own particular people in this country back to your hometown and exploring how the things that you've studied and learnt about apply to the area that you grew up in. So there's opportunities for small business development, particularly in tourism, in the most remote parts of South Africa.
Katie, thank you for joining us. Very interesting. I'm sure you guys will be engaging with schools and the like all over the country. And let's hope that we can get many, many more young people involved in the work that you do. That's from the Southern African Heritage Resource Agency. That was Katie Smuts, and she was telling us about the campaign that they're on to try and get more young people involved in the field of heritage, not just in South Africa, but the wider world. Now, Southern African countries are facing serious drought, which is likely to damage harvests and have negative economic impacts from southern Angola to Botswana, Lesotho, Malawi, Mozambique, and also Namibia. The impact is looking particularly serious for Zimbabwe, where the economy has been struggling for at least 5 years to recover from a recession that was marked by 1 billion% hyperinflation, widespread food shortages as well. Now, governments and foreign agencies have expressed their concerns and are still assessing the needs of the millions that may soon require food aid. Now, joining us here in studio today is the United Nations World Food Programme Communications Officer for Southern Africa, Mr. David Orr. Good morning to you, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
It's a mouthful. The picture looks rather bleak. Is it as bleak as we see it here in Southern Africa?
It is pretty bad. People are talking about the worst situation in anywhere between the last 6 and 10 years. We're looking at significant food shortages, a looming food crisis over coming months, due basically to a bad harvest across the region.
Now, here in South Africa, we've also been battling with our maize harvests. Drought has really caused a lot of issues around our green belt. What's the outlook for South Africa, and how does that then tie into the rest of Southern Africa?
I think in South Africa, as elsewhere in the region, we're looking at a reduced harvest of approximately a quarter down on last year, which was very good generally in the region. The situation in places like Zimbabwe, which you mentioned in your introduction, is actually even more serious. But the average is about between a quarter and a third down on last year's harvest.
The impact of record highs, drawn-out dry seasons, is it a scenario around climate change and the warming of the Indian Ocean that's having this devastating effect on Southern Africa?
Well, I think most experts are linking it to climate change. We have, certainly in the last 2 decades, I would say, in Southern Africa, seen some quite large extremes of extreme weather events, particularly drought and flooding, and it's in fact what we've experienced since the end of last year. Very poor, slow onset rains in December across the region, drought, dry spells continuing right on through January and February. In some areas, extreme, very heavy rains like Malawi, Mozambique, which caused massive flooding in those areas. And it wasn't actually until March that the rains came, but then it was sort of too little too late, really, particularly for the maize harvest. So it wasn't just drought, it was kind of extremes. You had dry spells in many areas and then extreme flooding in others.
How can these affected nations adapt to these climate changing conditions in order to still be able to feed the populations of each country?
Well, that's something that everyone is looking at. Governments, humanitarian organizations, the World Food Programme included, our partners. We're looking at how we can make people, basically ordinary communities, more resilient to extreme weather, and so that given that these sort of conditions are becoming increasingly frequent across the region, how do you help people cope when they do strike? And that's the big question, really. And it can be everything from, helping people build irrigation channels, dams, water harvesting features, all those sort of things, so that they're a little bit better prepared.
Now we've seen what kind of issues we've had here in South Africa with migration, people coming for a better life, for that matter. Do you see climate change, do you see drought and the like forcing Southern Africa to deal with a new wave of migration and refugee patterns?
I think yes. I mean, climate change worldwide has been linked to everything from conflict to growing urbanization, and certainly in Southern Africa, people are moving into the cities. You've got huge population in this region, which is pretty food insecure, and that's really the problem. When you've got so many people, maybe half the regional population living on less than $1 a day, high levels of undernutrition, then people are much more susceptible to hunger. And when extreme weather does strike, when crops dry up, harvests fail, that's the real problem. You've got this underlying food insecurity anyway, with very vulnerable populations.
Now, the situation is bad as it is at the moment. Is there a risk, and what is that risk, that the situation across southern and in the rest of the African continent can get a lot worse?
Well, will it get worse? We're just over the harvest period now. What I think is going to happen, usually you've got the lean season, which starts in November and runs up until March. That's when traditionally people's food stocks become depleted in that period before the harvest, the following year's harvest. We're going to see the lean season in some countries like Zimbabwe, Malawi, starting a lot earlier, maybe as early as from September. So you will have these rural populations, which are a bit food insecure in many parts of the region anyway, having to really, facing problems with their food supply earlier than in previous years.
Well, thank you for joining us today and alerting us to this escalating problem throughout Southern Africa. That is the Communications Officer for Southern Africa, David Orr. He's with the United Nations World Food Programme. We're talking about food insecurity, drought, and how it affects all of us here in Southern Africa. But let's move on and have a look at your tweets. I think people are talking about FIFA this morning. Fuad says, I'm afraid UEFA will huff and puff, but no one will blow the World Cup money-making house down. Talking about FIFA corruption, FIFA arrests. Manzaka says, conspiracy isn't an easy word, but the way the USA do things, it's easy to understand the word FIFA corruption. At the Simpsons, at SAFA, not involved. Dominic Whiteman says, FIFA 16 is the most realistic football game so far. It even arrives in a brown envelope. Talking about Blatter Art. That's a different spin on it. Zola Doda says, so if the FBI didn't say anything, we wouldn't have known about this 10 million US dollars. Safanet, what else is hidden from us? Well, that was never hidden, Zola. It was paid directly to FIFA, and they decided how this money was going to be disseminated, as you do the kind of work that they do at FIFA. That is where we wrap it for you. If you have any further views on the issue of corruption within world sport, at the SABC Newsroom is where you can send us your contribution. This show is broadcast live from our studios here in Auckland Park, Johannesburg, every weekday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. We also stream live on YouTube at that time, with the whole show always available on demand on our YouTube channel. This is SABC News. You have been watching Newsroom. We love it in the morning.